My name is Tori Judd and I'm 34 years old. 3 weeks ago, in a family courtroom in Zanesville, Ohio, my mother raised her right hand and told a judge that I was unstable and unfit to raise my son. My father sat in the row behind her and nodded along. I sat still, hands folded on the table, and let her finish every sentence. I didn't argue. Then my attorney slid one page across the table toward the bench. Just one page. What the judge did after he read it twice, and who he made my mother stay seated for while that phone call was made, is the part my family still can't talk about at Sunday dinner. Mostly because there are no more Sunday dinners. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where quiet women Fina lie tell the stories their families spent years trying to bury. If you've ever been called too broken for the life you built with your own two hands, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe, because you do not want to miss how this one ends. To show you what she tried to take, I have to rewind 6 months. It's a Tuesday in February. I come off a 12-hour night shift at Muskingum Valley Hospice, smelling like coffee and hand sanitizer, and I make pancakes. Anyway, my son Owen is 9. He eats breakfast with a spiral notebook open next to his plate, drawing weather maps, cold fronts, pressure systems, little arrows everywhere, because his father used to read the sky for a living, and some things pass down whether you plan them or not. Our house on Moran Street still has one unpainted patch of drywall in the hallway. Daniel was sanding it the week before he died 7 years, and I have never let anyone touch it. People ask how I do my job, sitting with the dying every night, holding hands that are letting go. I tell them the truth. Strangers trust me in the most sacred room of their lives. Families hand me their mothers, their husbands, their last hours, and I have never once dropped that weight. I was proud of that. I'm telling you all of this so you understand what I had, and what it cost to defend it. That morning, while Owen argued with me about whether a tornado could happen in February, my phone rang. It was my mother. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about Owen's game on Saturday. She said, "Good news. I spoke with the principal at St. Anne's and they have a spot for Owen in the fall." I stood there holding a spatula, trying to remember any conversation where I had agreed to move my son to a new school. There wasn't one, with my mother. There never needed to be. Sunday dinner at my parents' house on Adair Avenue was not an invitation, it was a standing appointment every week of my life. Pot roast at 5:30 sharp. My mother, Elaine, ran that table the way some people run small countries. She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. That Sunday, she spent the first 20 minutes on the church bulletin, then turned to me with her gentle face on. "I heard Owen is still going to that little group on Thursdays." She meant his grief group, 6 kids at the community center who all lost somebody, drawing pictures and saying their people's names out loud. "It's good for him," I said. My mother folded her napkin into a perfect square. "Counseling," she said, the way other people say mold. "People hear things, Tori. A boy gets a file started on him and that follows. We don't tell strangers our business." My father, Raymond, was outside wiping down a car that was already clean. That was his position on most things. Before we left, I asked her for the second time that year for my spare house key back. She'd had it since 2019, and she used it. I'd come home to find my thermostat adjusted, my mail stacked differently, once a casserole in my refrigerator when I knew for a fact I'd locked the door that morning. She smiled like I'd said something sweet. "Honey, someone responsible should have a key, that's just planning ahead." In the car, Owen watched the street lights slide by, and then asked in the careful voice kids use when they already sense the answer is heavy. "Mom, what happened to you in 2019? Grandma says that's why she worries about us." I kept both hands on the wheel and my voice level. 9 years old, and her version had reached him before mine. "Here's what actually happened in 2019. And I'm going to tell it straight because the whole point of this story is that I stopped letting other people tell it for me." In February of that year, an ice storm took down half the power lines in the county. My husband Daniel was a utility lineman, 10 years on the job, the guy they called when nobody else wanted to go up. He went up on a line off Route 60 at 2 in the morning and he didn't come home. He was 29. Owen was 21 months old. I was 27 and I planned a funeral with a toddler on my hip. For about a month I ran on procedure. Nurses are good at that. Then one morning in March, I stood in the medication room at my old hospital job holding a vial, and I could not tell you which patient it was for, or whether I had already drawn it once. Nothing happened. That's the part people skip. Nothing happened. I caught it. I set the vial down, walked to my supervisor, and reported myself. 2 days later, I checked into Riverbend, a grief and depression program 2 hours away, and I stayed 10 weeks. I want to be precise here because precision is what saved me. Later, nobody committed me. Nobody found me unfit. I looked at my own gauges, saw a warning light, and grounded myself the way Daniel would have grounded a crew in a lightning storm. My mother drove me there at the front doors of Riverbend. She squeezed my hand and lowered her voice like we were at a viewing. "We don't tell strangers our business," she said. She meant the neighbors. She meant the church. Before I walked through those doors, I did one more thing. One piece of paperwork my mother called sensible. 7 years later, that piece of paper saved my life and it buried her. Ohio has a law for exactly my situation and I used it. It's called a grandparent power of attorney. A parent who's temporarily unable to care for a child, medical treatment, deployment, whatever life throws, can sign over caretaking authority to a grandparent on paper filed with the juvenile court with an end built in. It is not surrender. The statute says it plainly. Saying one is not evidence you're an unfit parent. It's the opposite. It's what a responsible parent does instead of just dropping the baby off and hoping. And here's the detail I need you to hold on to. The paperwork wasn't my idea. It was my mother's. When I asked her to take Owen for the spring, she straightened her back and said, "If I'm doing this, we do it properly. Papers notarized. I'm not running a babysitting service." She hired the lawyer herself. She sat at his mahogany desk in her good coat, and signed her name in that looping church lady script, right under a paragraph her own attorney had drafted an acknowledgement that she was accepting temporary care of Owen on behalf of his mother, who needed medical help, and would resume custody. I signed too. My hand shook, hers didn't. That August I brought Owen home in September 3, 2019. We filed the termination together and the arrangement ended on the record in front of a magistrate, clean as a discharge summary. And then my family did what my family does. We never spoke of it again. Not the storm, not Riverbend, not the papers. I put my copies in Daniel's old green metal box, put the box in the back of my closet, and treated that whole year like a body I'd buried myself. My mother demanded that paperwork in 2019. 7 years later, her lawyer would stand in a courtroom and call it a lie I invented. Back to this year. I said no to St. Anne's. I said it politely once, the way you'd decline a second helping. Owen was staying at his school with his friends, with his Thursday group. Then I did something I'd been putting off for 7 years. I called a locksmith and changed the locks on my own house. I didn't announce it. I just stopped pretending a key in my mother's junk drawer was normal. 3 days later, at 900 on a school night, red and blue lights washed across my living room wall. 2 Zanesville police officers stood on my porch, polite and tired, responding to a call. Someone had reported a child, possibly unsupervised, at this address. The caller concerned the mother might be impaired. I was standing there in scrubs with a laundry basket on my hip. Owen came halfway down the stairs in his pajamas and froze, one hand on the rail, looking at the officers, then at me, doing the math a 9-year-old shouldn't have to do. The officers came in, saw his homework on the table and his lunch packed in the fridge, apologized twice, and left within 20 minutes. Across the street, I watched Carol Brennan's curtain fall back into place. The cruiser idled at the curb a while before it pulled away, and every second of it was a broadcast to my whole block. I got Owen back in bed and sat on the bottom stair until midnight. The next morning, my phone rang at 7. My mother, warm as fresh bread. "I heard there was some commotion at the house last night," she said. "Are you feeling all right, sweetheart?" I hadn't told her. I hadn't told anyone. I looked at my new deadbolt and understood that the lock had never been the point of entry. 2 weeks after the welfare check, a man in a windbreaker knocked on my door at dinner time, confirmed my name, and handed me a manila envelope like it was a pizza. "You've been served. Have a good night." Inside was a complaint filed in the Muskingum County Juvenile Court in the matter of Owen Daniel Judd, a minor petitioner Elaine Weller. My mother was asking a judge to take legal custody of my son and give him to her. I stood in my kitchen and read it while Owen's mac and cheese went cold on the stove. The language was a stranger's language wearing my family's clothes. The child's mother has a history of psychiatric institutionalization. The child's mother exhibits ongoing instability. The child's welfare requires placement with his grandparents who provided his primary care during the mother's incapacity in 2019. I read the word institutionalization 3 times, a word that long and that cold to describe the 10 weeks I spent saving my own life on my own initiative with her signature on the door. There was an affidavit attached, sworn and notarized, my mother's looping script at the bottom. The last line said she brought this action with a heavy heart out of love. I put the papers face down on the counter, served Owen his dinner, asked about his day, and did not taste anything I ate. After he was asleep, I sat with my phone and looked at the contact that said Mom for a long time. 34 years of instructions were stored under that word: call her, explain, apologize, smooth it over, keep it in the family. We don't tell strangers our business. I scrolled past it and dialed a number from the internet instead. A family law office above a laundromat on Main Street. Sometimes the bravest thing a quiet woman does is change who she calls first. Lena Carver's office smelled like dryer sheets from the laundromat downstairs, and her desk had a gouge in it the size of a thumb, and I trusted her inside of 10 minutes. She read the complaint in silence, flipping pages with one finger. Okay, she said. First, the law. In Ohio, a grandparent can't take a child from a parent just by loving him loudly. She has to prove you're unsuitable. That's a high bar and it's her burden, not yours. She tapped the affidavit, which means their entire case is one word: unstable, wearing a courtroom suit. Then she asked about 2019 and I told her all of it. The storm, the medication room, Riverbend, the power of attorney, the termination in September. She sat back slowly, the way people do when you hand them something heavier than they expected. Tori, you have a filed, notarized court-stamped paper trail where she accepted temporary care and acknowledged you'd resume custody. You built their worst nightmare in 2019, and you don't even know it. Let me use it. And I heard myself say, no, if that file came into open court, it would stop being mine. The word Riverbend would live in a public record with my son's name on the caption, in a county where my mother's church prints a bulletin. I asked her to win on the present. 7 clean years, my work, my witnesses, and leave 2019 buried. Lena looked at me for a moment too long. Then we fight with one hand, she said, for now. Her retainer was $3,500. I moved it out of the porch repair fund the same night. By Friday, opposing counsel sent their first letter. They wanted me to submit to a psychological evaluation, and they wanted temporary visitation for my mother while the case ran. The machine was warming up. If you're listening to this and someone has ever read your worst chapter back to you in front of strangers, stay with me because this next part is where I stopped apologizing for mine. And if you know that feeling, tell me in the comments and make sure you're subscribed. I went to my father first because some part of me still believed in him the way you believe in a porch light. Raymond Dwellers spent 40 years fixing engines at the county garage and retirement hadn't changed him. I found him at Hartzell's Auto Parts drinking counter coffee with men who measure conversation in nods. I asked him to walk out to the lot with me. He came wiping his hands on a rag out of pure habit. Dad, I said, you've watched me raise Owen for 9 years. You know me. Tell her to stop this. He looked at the rag. He folded it in half, then in half again, like he could make it small enough to disappear. Your mother knows best. Sweetheart. He said she's doing this because she loves you. You'll see that someday. I stood in that gravel lot and watched 66 years of a man fold himself in half along with that rag. He wasn't confused. He wasn't fooled. He had simply decided somewhere far back down the road that agreeing with my mother was cheaper than knowing things. The nodding I'd see later in that courtroom. He'd been rehearsing it my whole life. I drove home past the fairgrounds and somewhere around Maple Avenue. A strange little thought climbed into the passenger seat and would not leave. In every album in my parents' house, my mother's side of the family starts and ends with her parents. No cousins, no sisters, no brothers, a whole generation blank. I had asked her once in 4th grade for a family tree project, and she'd taken the worksheet from my hands and finished it herself at the kitchen table in pen. My mother is an only child. I had always believed that. I want you to remember that I believed it. You can measure standing in a church town without anyone saying a word to your face. You measure it in casseroles. After Daniel died, they arrived on my porch for 2 months straight. Tuna taco. That one with the crushed crackers on top. Casseroles are the local currency of concern. That spring, the currency stopped. First, the hospitality committee ladies got busy when I volunteered for the fish fry. Then, Owen's baseball coach, who used to text me his batting tips, started answering in one line. Then, not at all. A mom from school moved a play date, then forgot to reschedule, then waved at me across the Kroger parking lot like I was a toll booth. Nobody was cruel. Cruel would have left fingerprints. This was weather. A cold front. My mother moved across town one prayer request at a time. My friend Bree, who works day shift at the hospice and hears everything in this county, eventually finally told me what was circulating. My mother at her hair appointment in that concerned voice that carries. We're just trying to get Owen somewhere stable before something happens again. Again, one word doing the work of a whole indictment. Not a lie you could catch. You can't suicide, just a story told softly over and over by the most trusted woman in the parish. I understood then what I was actually up against. My mother doesn't fight with facts. She fights with atmosphere, and you cannot cross-examine the weather. I stood in my kitchen that night, looked at the unpainted patch of drywall in the hallway, and said out loud to nobody, "All right, nurses make lists when things fall apart. It's how we're built." I took a fresh notebook from Owen's school supplies and wrote a date at the top of the first page. The next hit came for my license. My manager called me in before shift closed the door and slid a letter across her desk with 2 fingers like it might be sticky. The Ohio Board of Nursing had received an anonymous complaint expressing concern regarding past impairment and asking whether Tori Judd was safe to practice. Anonymous concern past impairment. By then, I could recognize my mother's fingerprints even when she wore gloves. Here's the thing about a board complaint. It doesn't matter that it's baseless. Once it's filed, there's a process. And the process doesn't care that your record is spotless, that you self-reported in 2019, that the program cleared you for practice with letters. While the review ran, my employer adjusted my assignments. They took me off Hazel Poot. Hazel is 91, sharp as a tack, dying of congestive heart failure with maximum dignity. And I had sat with her every Tuesday and Thursday night for 5 months. When the substitute nurse came in, Hazel demanded to know where her girl was. That's what got me. Not the letter, not HR's careful faces, a dying woman asking where her girl was, and nobody being allowed to tell her the truth. That night, I started what I should have started in February. Nurses chart everything because in medicine, the rule is simple. If it isn't written down, it didn't happen. So, I began charting my own life. Every call, every date, every witness, the welfare check, badge numbers included, the St. Anne's ambush, the key, the locks, the letter from the board, neat columns, black ink, no adjectives. My mother had spent months writing her story about me in whispers. Fine. I would keep mine in records. When Owen saw the notebook, he asked if I was doing homework. Something like that, I said. He nodded and went back to his weather maps. And then, without looking up, he told me the thing that broke my week in half. "Grandma says you were sick in your head in 2019, Owen said, still coloring in a cold front, saying it the way kids repeat things they've been carrying too long. She says, mummies who get sick like that can get sick again. And if anything at home ever feels scary, I should call her first. She says that's our secret because we don't tell strangers our business and Grandma isn't strangers." The crayon kept moving. I sat very still and did the hardest thing I have ever done in my kitchen, which is nothing. I hen snorts, did not gasp, did not editorialize, did not hand a 9-year-old my rage to carry on top of everything else. I asked one soft question. How does it feel when she says that? And he shrugged with one shoulder, which in 9-year-old means it feels bad. So, my mother had taken her own commandment, the one she'd pressed into me at the doors of River Bend, and turned it into recruitment. She was building a little informant out of my son's love for her, teaching him that his mother was a condition to be monitored. That sadness in our house was something you report. I told him the truth in the only size he could hold. Mom got very sad after Dad died, and I asked good people for help and it worked. Asking for help is how you stay strong, and you never have to keep secrets about me from anyone. He looked at me for a long second and went back to his map. I wrote the whole exchange in the notebook verbatim, time-stamped, hand steady. Then I called Lina's office and left a message, and I called Owen's grief group counselor and left another. The next morning, Lena called back with news. The court had granted their motion. I was going to be psychologically evaluated by order of a judge. They asked for it, Lena said, and there was something new in her voice. Good, now breathe. Evaluations cut both ways. Deposition prep with Lena was its own kind of physical. She fired questions at me across the gouged desk for 2 hours about my medications, my sleep, the medication room, whether I'd ever even once forgotten Owen anywhere. Playing opposing counsel so well I wanted to hate her a little. Afterward, his snorts, she got 2 coffees from the machine and set one in front of me like a verdict. Their case is 2019, she said. Every road they have runs through it, and our kill shot is also 2019. Your file, your paperwork, her signature. You built it, Tori. Let me use it. I looked out her window at the laundromat's steam vent huffing into the cold. I thought about the word Riverbend printed in a public caption. The parish bulletin. Owen, at 15, at some point typing his own name into a search bar, finding his mother's worst spring laid out in a stranger's language. And I heard my mother's voice coming out of my own mouth. And that's the part I can't dress up for you. Not the file, Lena. Win it on the present, please. She didn't push. She just said quietly, paper beats poetry, but it's your name on the paper, and let me carry that home. That night, after Owen was asleep, I stood in my closet doorway with the light off. Daniel's green metal box sat on the top shelf where it had sat for 7 years, latched, dustless, because I dusted around my own buried year like a good little groundskeeper. My hand went up toward it, stopped, came back down. Not yet, I told the dark, like the box had asked me a question. Looking back, I think it had been asking the whole time. The deposition itself was held in a conference room with water nobody drank. My mother's lawyer, a smooth man named Prescott with a class ring, spent 3 hours trying to take me apart in a voice like warm oil. He read my old prescriptions out loud, one by one, mispronouncing them. Waiting for me to flinch, he asked if I'd ever forgotten Owen at school, whether I locked the medicine cabinet, whether I described myself as someone who cries easily. I answered every question the way I read vital signs at 3 in the morning. Level exact, no editorial, name of medication, dates of use discontinued with physician Signoff 2019. He kept glancing at his legal pad like the interesting version of me was written on it, and the woman in the chair kept failing to show up. When it ended, I walked to my car with my keys laced through my fingers and realized my hands weren't shaking. Something in me had gone quiet and cold and clear, and in that clarity, one fact stood up straight. A whisper dies when it touches paper. Their whole case was atmosphere. Atmosphere loses to documents, but only if somebody's willing to put the documents on the table. I didn't drive home. I drove downtown to the juvenile court records office, took a number, and stood at the counter under fluorescent lights that hummed like a ward at night. I filled out a request for certified copies of the complete 2019 file, case number, party names, every attachment, the termination included. The clerk stamped my form without looking up, tore off a yellow carbon receipt, and said the words like she said them 50 times a day, 10 business days, 10 business days. The truth had a pickup date. At home. I taped that yellow receipt inside my kitchen cabinet door next to Owen's drawing of a supercell, where I would see it every single morning while I reached for the coffee. While I waited on the certified copies, I finally took down the green box. Kitchen table, midnight, 1 lamp. The latch opened easier than it had any right to, and there it was on top in a folder Daniel had labeled in his blocky electrician's printback when the folder held warranties. The grandparent power of attorney, March 2019. My signature at the bottom, 27 years old and shaking so hard the T and Tori looks like a lightning strike. And next to it, my mother's unhurried. Looping, church program perfect, Elaine Weller. She'd signed on the line her own lawyer, prepared under the acknowledgement paragraph he drafted. And I read that paragraph over again for the first time in 7 years. Temporary care of the minor child on behalf of his mother, a fit and devoted mother receiving medical care. Custody to resume upon her recovery. A fit and devoted mother. Her lawyer wrote it. She read it. She signed it in her good coat at his mahogany desk because appearances demanded proper papers. I sat there and laughed once. Short and unfunny the way you laugh in a hospital hallway. All these years I'd carried that folder like evidence against myself. It had never once occurred to me that it was evidence for me that in her hurry to make my collapse official, my mother had put her own name to the truth. I said it out loud in my empty kitchen, quiet like a vow. I wrote it down so nobody could rewrite it. At the very bottom of the folder was one more document I'd forgotten existed. The transcript of the termination hearing, September 3, 2019. The day the arrangement ended. My mother had made a statement to the magistrate that morning on the record. I read the first line of what she said back then, and I had to set the pages down and walk to the sink. My father came by that Saturday to drop off Owen's cleats from the last visit before Lena had visitation paused. He stood on my porch holding the shoes like they were fragile, and he didn't leave. He looked at the new deadbolt for a while. Then, in a voice I'd never heard him use, my father said more words to me in 10 minutes than I'd heard in 10 years. Your mother had a sister, he said. Rosemary. Older by 2 years. I met them both in high school. I didn't move. I was afraid he'd stop the way you're afraid a bird will startle. Rosemary had what they called nerves back then. Spells. Maybe today a doctor would give it a name and a pill and she'd have a house and grandkids. In 1974, her daddy signed some papers and 2 men drove her to the state hospital down in Athens. Your mother was 11. She watched from the stairs. He turned the cleats over in his hands. Family sold Rosemary's piano that same fall. Nobody said her name at that table again. Not at dinner, not at Christmas. Not at her own mother's funeral. Your mom learned it like a catechism Tory. People who get seen get taken. She's not trying to hurt you. He finally looked at me. In her mind, she's getting to Owen before the strangers do. Before somebody does to you too what got done to Rosemary. I stood there holding my son's cleats. And for one dangerous moment, I saw her 11 years old on a staircase watching a car take her sister away for the crime of being sad out loud. Then I remembered whose name was on the complaint against me, and the moment passed. Understanding where the bullet was cast doesn't change where it's aimed. And you, Dad, I asked, what did you learn? He walked to his truck without answering. Watching his tail lights, I realized he'd never answered a question in his life. He'd only ever nodded. The settlement offer arrived on a Thursday, printed on paper so heavy it felt like furniture. Prescott called it a family resolution. My mother would drop the custody petition, all of it tomorrow, if I agreed to a few small things, standing unsupervised visitation every other weekend and Wednesdays. Owen enrolled at St. Anne's by fall, family reunification counseling with a counselor mutually agreed upon. The mutual agreement being a woman from their parish network and a mutual confidentiality clause regarding past health matters, meaning 2019 stays buried. Her allegations get withdrawn, everything sealed, everyone smiles at Easter. Lena laid it on the desk and gave it to me straight because that's what I paid her for. It's the cheapest exit, Tori. Sign it and tomorrow you wake up with your records sealed, your legal fees capped and your Sundays back. Trials are a casino. This is certainty. I sat with the pen in my hand. I want to be honest with you about this part. It wasn't close to an easy no. I was tired the way you get tired underwater. I had a kid who flinched at red and blue lights now, a legal bill eating the porch fund, a job file with an asterisk on it, and a town full of weather. All of that could be over by lunch. All it would cost was the shape of my life. Her school, her counselor, her calendar, her key slid back into every door of it, with a gag claw on my own history as the bow. The pen actually touched the paper. It made a small dot. Then my phone buzzed on the desk. Screen up. Owen's school. He was in the nurse's office with a stomach ache. The third one that week, the nurse noted, and did I have a minute to talk about how he was doing generally? I looked at the dot of ink for a long moment. Then I put the cap back on the pen. That night, Owen woke up crying at 2 in the morning, and when I got to his room, he grabbed my sleeve with both hands and asked the question that ended the old version of my life. If I get sad like you did, he said hiccuping, will Grandma take me? There it was. 3 generations of my mother's catechism, alive and well and running in my 9-year-old at 2 a.m. Sadness means you get taken. Love keeps score. Tell Grandma first. He had a stomach ache all week because he was carrying it in the only place kids have to put things. Her snorts. I held him until he slept. Then I sat at the kitchen table until the window went gray and I was done being managed. In the morning, I called Lena and told her 3 things in order. 1. Tear up the settlement. We're not selling him the quiet. The quiet is what's making him sick. 2. File the motion, the certified 2019 file, all of it. The power of attorney, the acknowledgement, the termination transcript into evidence on the record under my name. 3. Draft a cease and desist letter to my parents. No contact with me or Owen outside the court process until this is over. Lena was silent for a second, and then I heard something I'd never heard from her. A laugh, short and fierce. There she is, she said. Now we fight with both hands. One more thing. When your mother testifies, and she will, do not flinch. Let her build her tower as high as she wants. Paper is patient. That afternoon I did one last piece of housekeeping. I found my mother's old spare key, the one that fit the lock I'd already replaced, put it in a padded envelope with no note, and sent it certified mail to Adair Avenue. Let her sign for it. If this story has ever been your story, if you've learned that boundaries aren't cruelty, they're triage, do me a favor and tell me in the comments and subscribe, because my mother is about to take the stand. The court-ordered evaluation took 2 sessions in an office with a sand tray for children and a box of tissues placed exactly 1 arm's length from every chair. Dr. Anil was thorough and fair, which by that point felt exotic. Her report came back in May, and Lena read the key lines to me over the phone. No current impairment, history of a major depressive episode in 2019, fully resolved with appropriate self-directed treatment, effective coping, strong, secure parent-child bond. I stood in my driveway listening and let myself for 1 entire minute believe the machine worked, feed it truth, receive justice. 3 days later, Prescott filed his response. And I got an education in what happens to truth on its way through emotion. His brief quoted the report as follows. Evaluator notes history of major depressive episode, full stop, no fully resolved, no self-directed. He'd harvested the diagnosis and composted the recovery. And it was all technically accurate. The way a ransom note is technically made of newspaper. Lena filed the correction, but she was blunt with me. Understand what you just learned. The truth doesn't defend itself, Tori. It sits in the file until someone stands up and reads the whole sentence out loud. I wrote that in my notebook, word for word, not knowing I'd be the one it was written for. Then came the witness list for the hearing, and I read it standing at my kitchen counter. Pastor Keel, 2 names from the hospitality committee, Carol Brennan from across the street, the curtain testifying, and therefore from the bottom in ordinary type like it was nothing. Raymond Dweller, my father. My mother was calling my own father to the stand against me, and he had agreed to go. The hearing came in July in a second-floor courtroom with yellow oak benches and a ceiling fan that ticked like a metronome. Judge Whitfield presided, a gray, careful man who read everything twice and said almost nothing. My mother wore powder blue, the color of harmless, on the stand. She was magnificent, I'll give her that. Voice trembling in the right places, tissue appearing at the right moments. 40 years of church committee stagecraft aimed down a courtroom's center aisle. She told the judge I had always been fragile, sensitive, she said, even as a girl, the kind you had to watch. She told him that in 2019, quote, we had to step in and take the baby. She could not function as a mother. Had to take as if there had been a rescue. As if there had been flashing lights and a ladder, instead of her own lawyer's mahogany desk and paperwork, she demanded. And then leaning toward the bench, gentle as a nurse with bad news, she said the sentence she believed would end me. I never believed she was fit. I said what I had to say back then to keep the peace. A mother knows. On cross, Lena asked exactly 1 line of questions that day. Mrs. Weller, the welfare check on Marion Street in February. Did you place that call? My mother straightened her scarf. Someone had to, she said, and looked at the judge as if expecting a nod, and then she added unprompted, glowing with the pure confidence of a woman who has never once been contradicted at her own table. In our family, we do not tell strangers our business. Everything I have done to keep it that way. A courtroom full of strangers wrote that down. I sat at counsel table with my hands folded on a plain yellow folder and said nothing at all. I didn't argue. Walking out, Lena murmured, tomorrow, let her sleep on her tower first. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Towers, my husband used to say, are just falls that haven't been scheduled yet. Owen never set foot in that courtroom, and he never will, if I can help it. He was represented by a guardian am, a rumpled, meticulous man named Foss, who had visited our house twice, watched Owen explain a pressure system to him for 20 minutes, checked the fridge, the smoke detectors, the report cards, and taken notes in shorthand. His report went into the record that afternoon, and Lena read me the highlights in the hallway. The home is stable, safe, and child-centered. The child is thriving academically and socially. The parent-child bond is strong and secure. And then one paragraph, dry as dust and worth more than everything I owned. The child expresses anxiety related to statements made by the maternal grandmother. Specifically, a fear that experiencing sadness may result in his removal from his mother's care. The undersigned finds this anxiety attributable to the grandmother's conduct, not the mother's. There it was. Hess snorts, the 2 a.m. question, the stomach aches, the little recruitment project translated into the flat credentialed language of a court officer, nobody could accuse of loving me. Recommendation. The child remain in the sole legal custody of his mother. Any grandparent contact to be conditioned and reviewed. I read that paragraph twice in the hallway and handed the phone back to Lena without a word because some kinds of relief don't fit through your voice. My mother's team had the report too. A reasonable person would have folded. Instead, by 500, Prescott filed 2 motions. One to discount the Guardian's report for bias, and one to recall Elaine Weller to the stand the next morning to clarify her earlier testimony. Lena read the second motion twice, and something in her face went very still, like a hunter hearing a twig. Good, she said. The tower grows. Tomorrow we pull 1 page out from the bottom. That night, Lena and I sat in her office over a pizza neither of us ate, and she laid the indame on the desk in the order it would happen. Tomorrow, she clarifies, Prescott will have spent tonight coaching her to soften the edges, but she won't soften, she can't, she's never once had to, she'll double down, and when her denial is locked, I hand up the file. She squared the certified copies with 2 fingers until the stack was perfect. The blue court stamp, the raised seal you could feel through the page like Braille. My name, her name. Then Lena said the part she'd been saving because good lawyers triage their truths. Once it's an exhibit, Tori, it's public. All of it, but there's a door. She slid a single sheet toward me, her handwriting on it, 2 lines. I can ask Judge Whitfield to review the medical attachments in camera in chambers sealed. The power of attorney comes in. Her signature comes in. But Riverbend stays out of the public file. Owen never reads it. The parish never reads it. You keep what you've been protecting for 7 years. She paused. Or I take the stand and read it myself, I said. She nodded slowly. One keeps your secret, one kills theirs. You don't have to decide until you're up there. But Tori, understand what you learned in May. The truth doesn't defend itself. It waits for someone willing to read the whole sentence out loud. I drove home under a sky Daniel would have called convective. I checked on Owen, who slept sideways like his father. Then I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter that began for Owen when you're older and filled both sides of the page and put it in the green metal box where the file used to live. In the morning I stood at the cabinet a moment looking at the yellow receipt taped inside the door. Pickup day, I thought, and drove downtown. The courtroom smelled like photocopies and old varnish. The ceiling fan ticked. The hospitality committee had turned out in force. Third bench, heads together. The parish's ears wearing florals. My father sat in the second row with his hat in his hands, which was strange because men don't hold hats indoors unless something in them is already at a graveside. My mother arrived in powder blue again, fresh scarf, patting arms down the aisle like a candidate. She looked exactly like a woman coming to accept an apology. At our table, Lena set down 1 thin manila folder, squared it to the table's edge, and left a single page's corner showing. No more. 1 page showing, she said, mostly to herself, like a carpenter checking a level. The rest is spine. Judge Whitfield took the bench, put on his glasses, and looked over them at the petitioner's table with the expression of a man who has read everything filed at 500 and slept on it. Mrs. Dweller, he said, you may retake the stand. I'll remind you that you remain under oath. My mother smiled at him warmly, graciously, the way you'd smile at a slow student, and swore anyway. Prescott's clarification was supposed to sand down her edges. Instead, my mother brought a chisel. She settled into the witness chair like it was the head of her own table and improved her story. The events of 2019, she explained, had been an emergency rescue. There had been no arrangement, no agreement, certainly no understanding that it was temporary. We took that baby in because there was no one else. I kept him safe while she was away. The pause before away was long enough to park a car in. Lena rose for cross and did the thing I'd watched her rehearse. She asked slowly, 3 ways, and let the answer stack. Mrs. Dweller, in 2019. Did you sign any document regarding Owen's care? My mother's chin came up. I did not. take your time. Any paperwork at all. An authorization, an agreement, anything you may have signed at an attorney's office. I have never needed paperwork to love my grandson. A soft ripple of approval from the third bench. So if a document existed bearing your notarized signature accepting temporary care of Owen on behalf of his mother, that would be what? A forgery. And my mother, who has never once been contradicted at her own table, who had 7 years of family silence as proof the past was whatever she said it was, looked directly at me, then back at Lena, and drove the last nail herself. I would never have signed anything calling her fit. Not in 2019. Not today. No mother in my position would. I believe she believed it. That's the part that still gets me at odd hours. She wasn't lying the way ordinary people lie. She had renovated her memory the way she renovated everything until it matched the drapes. And she'd forgotten that in 2019, appearances had demanded proper papers. And proper papers is exactly what her own lawyer had drafted. Lena let the silence sit for one tick of the ceiling fan, then turned to the bench. Your Honor, may I approach? The manila folder opened with a sound like a held breath finally let go. My attorney slid one page across the signature page of the 2019 Grandparent Power of Attorney certified copy. The juvenile court's raised seal catching the light like frost. Bailiff to bench. Judge Whitfield put on his glasses. He read it once and his face did nothing. He read it twice and the courtroom got so quiet I could hear the fan tick and the stenographer breathe. Then he looked up, not at Lena, at my mother. Mrs. Weller. His voice was even, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. I'm going to read you one line from this document, executed March 2019 before a notary above a signature that appears to be yours. The undersigned accepts temporary care of the minor child on behalf of his mother, a fit and devoted mother receiving medical care custody to resume upon her recovery. He took off his glasses. A fit and devoted mother. Your words, Mrs. Weller. My mother's hand went to her scarf. That was drafted by counsel you retained, ma'am. The judge said his name is on the filing. Please remain seated. And then, while my mother sat pinned under her own signature, in front of the hospitality committee, Judge Whitfield turned to his clerk and said, the sentence the title of my story promised you. Call juvenile records. I want the complete 2019 file and the termination transcript certified up to this courtroom before recess. We sat in that ticking quiet for 11 minutes, while a phone was dialed and a cart was wheeled, and a second seal was verified, and then the transcript from September 3, 2019, was read into the record. My mother's own statement to the magistrate, 7 years younger and just as confident, praising her daughter's recovery, supporting the return of custody, telling that court, and I quote, that Tori had done everything right, and Owen belonged with his mother. 2 sworn statements, 2 courtrooms, both hers. They could not both be true, and everyone under that ceiling fan knew which one had a seal on it. Prescott asked for a recess. The judge declined. Then he looked over his glasses at our table at me and said, Counsel, does your client wish the attached medical summary reviewed in camera? And the whole room turned to look at the quiet woman with the folded hands. In camera. In chambers, sealed. It was everything I'd asked Lena for since the day above the laundromat. The win and the privacy, both gift-wrapped by a careful judge. Riverbend stays out of the public record. The parish never reads it. Owen never finds it in a search bar. All I had to do was nod the way my father nods and let the paper do the talking while I kept my worst spring in the dark where I'd buried it. Lena looked at me and did not answer for me. And I thought about a notebook full of dates in black ink, and a report that got harvested down to its diagnosis, and a 9-year-old carrying a secret in his stomach because the women in this family pass silence down like china. The truth doesn't defend itself. It waits for someone willing to read the whole sentence out loud. I stood up at counsel table. No, Your Honor, I said. I'd like to testify to it myself. So I took the stand in front of the strangers and I told our business. I told them about the ice storm and a lineman who went up at 2 in the morning and didn't come down, about a medication room in March, and a vial I sat down, and a supervisor I walked to on my own 2 feet about 10 weeks at a place called Riverbend. I said the name slowly twice so nobody would ever get to whisper it again, and about the paperwork I signed on my way in, because even at the bottom of my life I did it properly. My voice stayed level the whole way through, the way it stays level at 300 in the morning, when a family needs the truth and needs it calm. It only slowed once on Daniel's name. Then I looked at my mother, powder blue, small in the second row, now beside a man holding his hat. And I finished it. My mother taught me we don't tell strangers our business, so she told a courtroom instead. I'm telling it myself, so my son hears it from me. In 2019. I wrote everything down so nobody could rewrite it, not even her. Judge Whitfield ruled from the bench that afternoon. Petition dismissed with prejudice. The evidence, he said, established the opposite of unsuitability. Petitioner to pay a share of respondents' fees, and the testimony of Elaine Weller was referred to the county prosecutor for review. The gavel came down once, not hard, like a period at the end of a long sentence. My chapter was public now forever, with my name on the caption and Riverbend spelled out in the transcript. That was the price. I paid it standing up. And the story my mother had spent months writing about me died in that room under her own signature, in front of her own church, told finally and completely in my voice and not hers. In the hallway afterward, the hospitality committee flowed past me like I was a lamppost, already drafting the version they'd tell at the salon. My mother walked out, flanked by Prescott, spine straight, scarf perfect, looking at a point about a foot above everyone's head. She did not look at me. I understood that she couldn't, that I was now a mirror with a court seal on it, and she'd spent 50 years learning never to look. Behind me, someone said my name. My father stood by the water fountain, hat still in his hands. Rosemary, he said, just the name out loud in a public building after 52 years, and his voice cracked in the middle of it like ice on a pond. Your mother's sister. I should have said her name in that courtroom. I should have said a lot of things a long time ago. He didn't ask to be forgiven, which is the only reason the door didn't close. I told him the truth. You can start with Sundays, I said. At my house alone. Owen eats at 5:30 and he'll show you the weather. He nodded. And for the first time in my life, the nod was pointed in the right direction. Out the courthouse window, his truck and her sedan pulled out of the same parking lot and turned different ways, and I stood there and watched 50 years of nodding along finally split at the seam. 3 weeks out, here's the ledger. The nursing board closed the anonymous complaint as unfounded and my first Tuesday back. Hazel Pitt looked up from her pillow and said, "There's my girl." And I had to fix her blanket for a while until my eyes behaved. The prosecutor's review of my mother's testimony is still open. People ask if I'm pushing for charges. I'm not. The county can carry that weight. My hands are full of better things. Consequences aren't something I need to cook. I just stopped standing between her and hers. My mother sent one card, cream-colored her looping script. When you've calmed down, we'll fix this quietly. The same operating system, waiting for a reboot that isn't coming. I didn't answer. The door isn't locked, but it has a price now. And the price is a true sentence spoken plainly, beginning with the words, "I lied." She's never paid that price for anyone. Maybe she will. The stigma I grew up under didn't die in that courtroom. The parish still has its glances. The salon still has its version. But it doesn't live in my house anymore. My father comes on Sundays alone. He sits at my kitchen table at 5:30 while Owen walks him through supercells and dew points. And last week he said, "Rosemary loved thunderstorms" out loud over pot roast unprompted, and the ceiling did not fall in. Owen's stomach aches stopped at his Thursday group. He raised his hand, said his dad was a lineman who died being brave, and said his mom got very sad once and asked for help and got better. Loud, clear, no whisper anywhere in it. The chain that ran from a staircase in 1974 through a courtroom in 2026 stops at that sentence, and the yellow receipt from the records office is still taped inside my kitchen cabinet next to Owen's drawing of a supercell. And I see it every morning when I reach for the coffee. Some families frame diplomas. I keep a records office receipt. It's the same thing if you think about it, proof that one day you walked in and asked for the whole truth in writing. Here's what I know now. Needing help never made me unfit to raise my son. But hiding that I'd needed it almost let someone else raise him. So write your truth down. Sign it. Date it. Keep the receipt, because the people who love you the loudest are sometimes the first ones who will try to rewrite it. That's my story. 1 page, 2 signatures, and a judge who read it twice. If this reminded you to keep your own records, your papers, your dates, your truth, take that as a sign and start tonight. And if someone you love has ever had their worst chapter used against them, share this video with them. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next visual art and design.